So I'll start off by giving attention to the polarity between the 12th house and the 6th house. When we understand the 12th house, I would describe it as perfection. The 12th house is spirit. The 12th house is the true nature of life. It's what's true right now. It's inconsequential to context. It doesn't require anything to happen or change. It's God. It's love. And that's why all the work in the 12th house is really about forgiveness and cultivating a relationship to the truth, which is something that can't be controlled or created or tarnished. When we move into the realm of the 6th house, does that mean that the 6th house is imperfection? Because certainly perfection and imperfection cannot both exist. It's almost like saying reality and unreality can both exist. I want to be able to frame our understanding of the 6th house in this way that actually brings some compassion and wisdom to the fact that life requires work. But to hold that understanding not from a place that implies that our own wellness, that our own wholeness, that our deserving of love, that our deserving of peace is contingent upon the work, is contingent upon all the things that we gotta constantly be working on in this human experience. I'm one of those people that tends to frequently ponder the question, how the heck did we get here? Like, what's going on? Frequently. And like the fact of having a body and my experience of that body and brushing my teeth and all the little chores and routines and daily practices to groom and take care of myself. There's this endless fascination with the fact of it existing. And for me, this is in general the fascination with the earth signs. Because there's a part of me that's so Neptunian that it's actually been very hard on my own journey to reconcile with the fact of there being something to do. And yet, I've been bound my whole life by teeth, by the need to deal with things. And I've learned simple lessons like, if I'm going about my business, doing things with my life, teaching, doing sessions, building relationship, but I haven't made my bed, I haven't put the dishes away, there are some things that are being left out and unaddressed, there is psychologically a quality of escaping the present moment and cultivating this energy of neglect that it's easy to miss. It's easy to, not take care of the details and to think that everything's just fine, but it's a slight growing state of dysfunction. And I've actually always found this to be so, and it's fascinating to me that when things get really difficult in my life, and I've kind of like, without realizing it, I turned around and I'm like, oh, I got into a really sick place. I notice that it's actually been a thing that's built slowly over time, like neglecting basic details, not grooming well, just ignoring the things that are here to do, that require my attention. And so it's always a humbling piece for me to come back to the basics, are the details of my life being cared for. How's my body? How's my physical environment? Are there chores or just things that need to be addressed that are being neglected? The perspective that I want to offer on the sixth house, and I'll start by giving it context with the earth signs. We have in Capricorn the principle of time and space. So the fact of physicality, of structure, of form itself is a Capricornian 10th house thing. The necessity for survival, which then points to an individuated consciousness that is aware of its biological existence. And in virtue of that awareness, there is an instinctual movement to survive. That's Taurus, second house. And this biological being operating with a body, with senses, that in virtue of needing to work with resources and form a relationship to resources, and in virtue of needing to construct one's use of time wisely, it then requires a soul to develop a certain mental adaptability, a certain flexibility that enables them to address the multifaceted details of being in this world, and that the physical aspects of this human experience are as diverse as humans, are as diverse as individual karma. The infinite ways that we can learn how to address and attend to the physical details of our life. And to really differentiate, Capricorn Saturn is how are we structuring our reality? Metaphorically, what are we putting on our schedule? How are we choosing to work with the perception and the experience of time and space as it seems that we're all somehow manifesting within it? How are we choosing to use it as a way to build and grow what we're here to do? You know, Capricorn 10th house says, take responsibility for the fact that you're here. And if you're not defining and cultivating consciousness around time and space, then you're not going to come into a spiritual maturity and an agency, and life will define everything for you. Others will define it for you. And then you'll age and you'll get sick, or you'll have financial issues and you'll have to deal with it. So Capricorn 10th really gives us that calling for agency. But in virtue of creating a schedule, in virtue of saying, okay, this is what I'm doing with my life, this is what I'm consciously constructing and creating within time and space, it then by necessity implies this need to be attuned and attentive to the details that are required in that. If you say to yourself, I am going to commit and use my time for meditation at a certain time of day, for spiritual practice, then it's not enough to be like, oh, it's 8 o'clock, time to meditate, because there is a physical reality around you. Where are you going to sit? What are you going to sit on? What are the things you're going to use, the props you're going to use to time yourself if you want to time yourself? There are just a zillion little details to be attuned to, right? For some of us, it might be, okay, well, I'm going to use my time to create a practice, and in virtue of that, I'm going to bring thoughtfulness to how am I molding and attending to my physical reality in a way that's functional, so I can support, which means, okay, I'm going to become mindful of what I'm eating around that time of meditation. I'm going to be mindful of what I'm putting in my mind, how I'm acting, what I'm thinking about. I'm going to create an environment that nurtures my devotion, that nurtures my point of focus and where I'm wanting to bring my attention. If you feel that to sit you need a cushion, you'll think about, what kind of cushion do I need? What would help me? The number of details that we can attend to and think about are quite quite infinite. And this is where the beauty of the sixth house really kicks in. Because everything in our life, in virtue of claiming a life with agency, asks us to bring thoughtfulness, patience, thoroughness to every single detail of our life. And the thoroughness, the great attentiveness to these details are an expression of refining and consciously crafting a world with the material of time and space that serves to create a holistically well-rounded, grounded, functional environment for spirit. What's so interesting about the sixth house is that on some level, it says the work never ends. And if we think of that as a sign of being enslaved and stuck by the drudgery of always needing to do something, like I always gotta brush my teeth or I always gotta do the dishes. If we hold it in that perspective, then we actually psychologically hold life in this never ending state of imperfection where it's like, it doesn't matter how hard I try, I'm going to need to do more work the next day. Or it doesn't matter how much I try to get all of my shoes in order and organized so I can just freaking meditate. Someone's going to come and knock my shoes out of order and ruin my concentration and ruin the aesthetic perfection and orderedness that I've created. It's not really about that, but it's easy for our minds. And really, in so many ways, this is a part of patriarchal thinking that is a very big part of the sixth house archetype. To be regarding perfection as a state to achieve. Thus, it creates this immense pressure to do everything right, to get it perfect, to achieve some sort of constructed idea of what the ideal form looks like. And thus to create an inner reality where we will feel perpetually bad about ourselves because we're never going to achieve this ideal, this standard that we've created in our mind that we project as what we're supposed to be. The way that I want to frame it is not moving towards perfection, but a way of cultivating deeper and deeper health, wellness, and functionality. The fact of us being spirit, the fact of us being whole and pure beings, coming in this world to remember and wake up to what we are can only mean that everything in our life serves our awakening, that everything in life serves to facilitate a life that reflects who we truly are. And this is reconciling the strongly held perception of opposite between spirit and flesh, which is the wound of the age of Pisces. Reconciling that perception of split is really reconciling this perception of spirit and perfection being out there, holiness, pure, and then me in this human experience I'm sinful. I have all these things and problems that are wrong with me. And, we all know this. that we can look at any part of our life and see where there's room for improvement. And if we adopt the attitude of, therefore I am unworthy, therefore I am sinful, therefore I am imperfect, therefore I cannot find peace until I perfect this, fill in the blank, your nose, your weight, your relationships, your health, your perfect ability to meditate well. It's infinite. But rather, when we look upon all the things to work on instead as an ongoing opportunity to bring more empowered consciousness into every crevice of our life, to more fully bring out and refine the wellness and peace and holiness that is our deserving. From this point of view, doing the dishes becomes a very exciting and meaningful cultivation. This is where the notion of karma yoga, as Jeff Green taught, is associated with the sixth house. Because we're doing work, we're serving a function, we're addressing things, whatever it might be. And we improve and we heal through doing it. And at the same time, we learn how to do it in ways that are more and more conducive and efficient and supportive to healing and wellness. So, for example, if you're doing the dishes and you're using a lot of water and a lot of soap, you get all the dishes done, and then you stack them up on the drying rack, and it's sort of crowded. There's room for improvement there. And most of us can just sort of live our life and get used to these routines and things that we do every day that are just like, just what you do, and you're used to it. But we take for granted that we might just be carrying in our hearts this feeling of like, oh, I hate doing this, I got to do it every day. But when we think about where we can actually be cultivating ourselves spiritually, in even doing the dishes, it's not a woo-woo, intangible kind of thing. It's very practical. It might be, oh, I notice that I waste a lot of water. And, even if there's a lot of water and you're not worried about the water bill, the energetics of not using something, not using a resource, not needing a resource that you're using, there's a certain energetic to it that almost like psychologically resonates with a certain quality of being, an unconsciousness, a psychology of cavalier and neglect. Maybe you're not worried about the soap, but still it's the same idea. This tendency to not bring care and attention to things, to take the physical reality for granted. And so my friend once taught me this amazing practice where you take a little bowl, you clean up the bowl, you put hot water in the bowl, and you put a little bit of soap in that bowl. And that bowl becomes your soap bowl. You rinse the dishes once, turn the water off, and then you can just soap up each dish by putting the sponge in the soap bowl. And then you rinse it off. And if the drying rack is full, how am I going to organize space? What items, what props, what tools can I use to make this more efficient? And what's happening is we're cleaning ourselves up. We're bringing more agency and peace and organization, wellness inside of ourselves. The sixth house is work. It brings never-ending, refined self-awareness of everything that can become improved. And psychologically, generally, there are two ways that souls tend to deal with this never-ending journey of self-improvement. One is procrastination on the basis of feeling like the work is too great, or I don't want to make a mistake. This is very common in the case of someone who has the work of, let's say working on a relationship with someone, and there's a need to communicate or acknowledge pieces or clarify things that have been neglected. Bringing consciousness and intention and purpose and meaning to things that have sort of been brushed off, or it can be in your work as a healer. Not wanting to make a mistake. And what is making a mistake? Making a mistake, to make it a really mundane example, although really there's no mundane example more than any other example, it's all really the same opportunity to cultivate spirit. If you're washing the dishes and you broke a bowl, right? So you made a mistake. And that mistake may have come about because the mind was wandering, you're trying to do it too much too quickly, and the bowl slipped out of your hand and it broke. Then there's like a fear or resistance of washing dishes, or a fear of doing your healing work because you said the wrong thing and it really triggered something for someone. The key is to get beyond that guilt. The guilt's a good thing because it reflects awareness of where we can become improved, where we can work on where we were otherwise neglectful. But to be able to say, okay, I feel this guilt and it's actually showing me where there's room for improvement. And so the procrastination is one way that a soul will actually kind of stay in sort of an unprocessed state of guilt, and thus not heal, thus not refine themselves, not walk the karma yoga path. The other, and this is something that Jeff Green taught that I really appreciate, is actually the psychology of sadism. Sadism could also be Pisces, but from the point of view of Virgo, it's basically this. I broke the bowl because of you. You were distracting me. You brought up all these things. My mind was wandering. I don't like the things that you've done or that you said or the way you treated me. And I broke the bowl. It's basically deflecting one's own path to self-correct and refine and cultivate more attentiveness and detail, and putting it onto someone else. And this really manifests when there's a deeply internalized sense of I'm screwed up. When that notion of I'm a sinner, I'm screwed up, my life is a lost cause, then it's very easy to become pretty manic towards the environment and the need to control the environment, the need to control others. And if others aren't fitting into the organized construct that we need them to be, it can easily lead to a very sadistic kind of psychology. In a similar way that if you're like working on a project on your computer and your computer crashes, there's like this impulse to like crash your computer and throw it out of the window. Right? How we have those feelings sometimes of like wanting to break something because it's not working, but of course it has nothing to do with that something. The other way of sort of resisting the path of self-correction and refinement is through masochism. That's kind of like the more common side of sixth house. Jeff Green basically defines sixth house Virgo masochism and sadism as masochism is my life's a wreck and it's my fault. Sadism is my life's a wreck and it's your fault. Pretty much that's the difference between the two. And so it's the same contract. I'm going to hurt myself. I'm going to wreck myself. And it's this interesting notion where consciousness becomes so identified with this construct of perfection that when we are going to be perpetually far from it, it's like being in the church and giving yourself lashes because you are a sinner and you're forever unworthy of the love of God. Many souls who have a strong sixth house emphasis do have strong past lives or current lives in the Judeo-Christian cosmology of sin and original sin, and you got to work really hard and suffer to be worthy of salvation. So let's talk about that. Suffering. Life is not about suffering. It's not God's will. It's not God's plan for us. And to believe that is to contradict God. Because either suffering is real or love and wholeness and perfection is real. Life does oftentimes bring about challenges, but those challenges aren't because we're supposed to be challenged. It's all a part of the journey of us learning who we are. And it's uncomfortable, but the work that we do specifically is actually meeting the place where we're suffering and unraveling that. Like, oh, I'm suffering now. If I don't need to be suffering, if suffering isn't my purpose here, there must be a different way to think. So a thing to understand about the Virgo is hardships, challenges, little snafus and things that don't work out the way you planned them to. They're not a cause to suffer, and they're not a part of the plan where you have to endure hardship in order to be purified and yada, yada, yada. It's a very unuseful way of thinking. Rather, they are all, from the sixth house point of view, all of it, all the hardships, all the snafus are these opportunities, these invitations to come back to that devotional quality of bringing care and attention to simply the work that is in front of you. When I got on this call, I realized because there's a last minute issue that we couldn't meet on Zoom, I was asked to go on Facebook. And when I realized that I couldn't share my screen on Facebook, I kind of struggled in the beginning with, do I go to Zoom or do I go to Facebook? And I just decided to stick with Facebook. And I had to give it a few moments to bring my mind into a state where I wasn't seeing this class as imperfect, as lacking, or as being deficient in any way. But to work with what I have, with the materials that are available now, with what I have now. And that's the key. The way that we approach something, the way that we bring our attention to something is the program that defines how we're going to be in relationship to that something throughout its duration. To haphazardly do the dishes because you got to get it done reflects a haphazard mindset where there's just this feeling of, I got to deal with this physical life and just kind of check it off the list. And that mentality is almost like, if I do all my chores, I'll get a sticker at the end of the day. And that's a big part of the patriarchal thinking, where we've learned to do the chores, to do the work, but not with love, not with a real caring, to not really care about what we're doing, to not really see it as an act of devotion where we get to really cultivate ourselves and refine and heal. When we're really connected to the lifeblood of the sixth house, there's a knowing that I'm not going to control everything here and I'm not going to make everything perfect, but I'm always going to be able to improve upon it. And the good news is, what is the work for you to do? Well, the one that's in front of you. It's actually so simple and it's very imminent. I'm like looking at my computer screen here and I'm noticing it's pretty dirty. And I probably wouldn't have noticed this if I wasn't talking about the sixth house right now. So it's like a note to self. Clean your computer screen. Earlier today, my partner, I don't know if she's listening, was cleaning up the living room. And I thought to myself, I love it when she cleans the living room. It's like such a good feeling. Man, do you have that feeling where like those days where you just gotta Marie Curie it all? Clean, go through everything. because there's a feeling of bringing more divinity into our life. There's a very a tangible feeling of making life better, making life work better. This is why the sixth house corresponds to healing and doctors, because the role of the doctor is to assess the functioning of the whole and to be able to, um, diagnose specific symptoms and issues and conditions, and to know how we can adjust ourselves to fix it. Now, more patriarchal type of thinking, not to downplay allopathic medicine, because obviously it's incredibly valuable, but a strictly allopathic mentality relates to the physical body from this point of view of let's just fix the symptoms. That's like, let's just wash the dishes. Let's just, buy everything in plastic so I can get the food. It's like it's dealing with like this immediate effect. And it's not thinking about the larger picture and how it can be improving the greater conditions for a continuous, ever unfolding state of wellness and well-being. So more holistic forms of medicine look at the whole system, the whole body, and not just the whole body, but the mind. And of course, your relationships. And this is where ultimately a good doctor is an astrologer. We used to know this. Years ago, there used to be innate understanding that you really can't practice good medicine without having astrology in it, because you can't separate the body from the rest of us. And it's holographic. There are layers of meaning and information in the planetary symbology. So, any area that we look at in our life, it's actually going to connect with every other area in our life. So as I'm at the halfway mark at this point, I do want to open up the field for questions. And being that I don't have any charts to share, I'm going to just take a moment and feel into what wants to come through now. Two things that I'll share. You often find people talking about the sixth house as humility. And I do feel that is often misunderstood. The humility of the sixth house is simply the humility of realizing that the work is not done. It's the humility in recognizing that there's always going to be room for improvement, which, if met with a certain level of self-love and acceptance that allows a person to continue doing their work, it creates a really deep wisdom where one can serve, one can fulfill a function, but not be identified with how it turns out. It's to do your work and to move on, to complete it, and to know you only do what you can right now and that there'll be more later. That quality is profound. It's like to do a session and to know that it was what it was. And that, the principle is do your best, work on yourself, correct anything that arises that needs to be corrected. But when we hold it neurotically from this need to make it perfect, we don't really find true humility, because it's actually more about control and more of an egocentric identification with the fruits of one's labor. We can have Libra in the sixth house, and we can be egocentrically identified with pleasing others. Am I giving to others the way that they want to be given? And if not, there can be this obsession with, making sure they're pleased, which obscures the true possibility of listening Libra. And what are you doing with Libra in the sixth house? You're cultivating your ability, you're refining your ability to listen and to really learn how to come into balance and to share in relationship that is functional and healthy and well. And that means self-acknowledgement and bringing awareness to areas that can be improved. And so long as there isn't this object focus towards what one is addressing, I need you to feel pleased by me, but rather a willingness to do the work and to keep on looking inside and reflecting and attending, it creates more health and wellness and beauty in a person's life. Whatever is on the sixth house, and that's humility. That's humility. It's to be able to learn and grow and correct yourself and to do your work, but to not be identified with the outcome, just to keep on working at it, keep on trying. I love sixth house Virgo people. It's like the biggest they turn on, but it's not the right word. It inspires my heart. I think because I am very Virgo myself, and it's just really healing and like heart opening and like devotional and like emotional for me to see people doing work in life. And they're not concerned with like how great they're doing or how well they're doing or how effective it is or how poor they're doing. They're just showing up and continuing to work on themselves. And you can feel a joy and a wellness and a quality of health that's growing, that's developing. There's a correlation in the sixth house to, it's not directly correspondent to the monastery or to the temple, but it does have a correlation to the sanctification of sacred space. Right? In the same way that like 12th house is meditation in terms of, communion or connection with the divine, but the space we create for it, the rituals, the tools, the techniques, etc., that's all sixth house polarity. The techniques, the practices that we do to connect with the divine, that's sixth house relative to the 12th house. And so there is this piece within the sixth house. And of course, this will be different for all souls, especially depending on the signs that are in the sixth house, the planetary ruler of the sixth house, etc. But there is somewhat of a quality to where we are living our life as if we're in a church, as if we're in a sanctuary, as if we're in a monastery, from the point of view that these environments really do masterfully reflect that quality of intentionality and functionality. Everything's organized, everything is where it is, and there's routine. There was a short time where I lived in an ashram in Virginia, and during that time, one of my chores was to vacuum this meditation hall every day at the same time. And maybe it was in the morning, I don't remember, but basically it's a place where, before sunrise, everyone would go, or a lot of people would go to do morning meditation and breathing practices. And that sense of every day, that meditation hall will have a clean floor, will be cared for, will be a clear and empty environment conducive to practice. I love that. Something so beautiful about that. And yet I also grew up in a way where there is such an attention to detail that it kind of fell under the category of losing the spirit to the letter. That in halachic Judaism, which is beautiful in so many regards, and there is historically a quality of neurosis to it, wherein attention is given to detail. And this is not true for everyone. I know so many people that experience and relate to this in a very devotional kind of way. And it's actually really beautiful. I think I want to think even more about that. But it's definitely common for there to be a life full of chores and routines and activities, and the way you do things, like what's the right thing to say when you eat this food? What's the right order to put your shoes on? Like all of these things can be, and I think this is the original intention behind it actually as I'm speaking, they can be a path of bringing sanctification into every part of your life and thus improving and working on yourself. But it does often, and it was for me in many ways, um, a way of living my life and experiencing um, the mundane, the chores, the details, everything um, as things to get through and things to do. And that's where like the monastery archetype can just become um, devoid of sanctification, devoid of that devotion, that quality of karma yoga where we know that we're actually cultivating a path that is bringing more wellness into all aspects of our life. And so it's such an important reflection, like what kind of world are we living in? And where do we perceive the reality of crisis? Where do we perceive and experience everything falling apart and being, is it our finances? Do we have Taurus in the sixth house? Is it our thyroid? Sagittarius? Is it our home life? Cancer? Emotions all over the place? Always something to do, not really feeling rested or nourished, not eating well? These are areas where we can catch ourselves and really come back to what is in front of me to address. What's in front of me to address? Cancer in the sixth house means we are improving and developing more accuracy and refinement and often correcting ourselves relative to nurturing the feminine, the emotional body, caring for what is most tender and delicate. And so it's bringing attention to details and just taking it one step at a time. And as we become more humble, we realize, oh, I can really use some help here. Let me take some classes. Let me work with a healer. Let me, do some things that will help me improve. And here are some daily practices that will help me. Yin yoga, Cancer in the sixth house, as a way to actually connect with my feeling body instead of running over it and creating crisis. Corrine says, I've noticed that it's all about letting go and being in the now, no matter the plan, to go with the flow, minute by minute, day by day. Yeah, nurturing the feminine. That's it. It is. Because it's sixth house, it's mutable. It's not fixed earth, it's not cardinal earth, it's mutable earth. Mutable means it's diffusive and it's all over the place. The mutable of any element is everywhere. So wherever we look, we're going to find more areas that are asking us to improve. And we don't have to invent them. I don't have to, improve my skill as a hair cutter unless I find myself cutting people's hair. Then yeah, absolutely. If I start cutting people's hair, like my daughter, if I ever cut her hair, then that's going to be a skill to work on. I'm going to want to learn technique. I'm changing her diaper. That is a technique that I'm learning and bringing more wellness and clarity and peace to it. There's a certain point where it's like it's not about life being fireworks and this big spiritual revelation, but to feel that the way that we're living our life is one that's conducive to improvement and making everything even better. So it's like changing the diaper. I can think offhand of so many things that I can improve and that I want to like learn about and think about and from the diapers that we use, um, the way that I wipe her tushy to be more efficient with the the wet ones that we use. So my mind can go infinitely in any detail, and that's beautiful. So the sign of the sixth house is where we're improving. It's where we're developing more accuracy and growing along the way. The planetary ruler of that gives us more information for the areas of life that we're bringing refinement and correction to. The aspects of the planetary ruler will also further give information for that. I was going to share my chart, but I feel like this is good. This is a good little talk. Anyone want to type in any questions that I can address? Otherwise, I think we may have come to the end. I'll close my eyes to tune in. Lastly, and most importantly, kind of riding on this last point, it really is about the present moment. It really is about the present moment. We can sharpen our pencil to get it perfect. So the tip is like the best tip ever. It's like perfect. If you like look at the book standards for a perfectly sharpened pencil, it'll fit just the right dimensions. But if we're not using that pencil, or if we're always stopping using it to make sure it's sharpened perfectly, we're creating a false materialism and a focus on perfection for its own cause. It becomes its own God that creates a psychology of separation within us. But it's really about the moment. And there's like a humility in realizing, oh yeah, I'm not perfect. There are aspects to, me that can be improved, and mostly aspects to my mind and areas that I wished were better that aren't. But I'm doing my work. I'm doing my job. And this is a really important blessing and a place for us to really reflect on in our own Virgo 6th house journey. You do your work and you move on. And Jeff Green said the value is in the effort. The value is in the effort. And I often have this imagery of myself as a very strong Virgo-y type person. It's like a real imagery of like being a schlump, that gets up in front of an audience and shares with as much authenticity and devotion and love as he possibly can. And it's like this interesting combination of like walking down the street and spirit's like, here, get in the van, we're going right now. Like, do your work right now, start right now, publish it right now, or don't publish it. Is there something to look at? Look at it. Create a space for it. What are the things not wanting to be done that are being ignored or procrastinated? Bring it into your life. And it's like this beautiful thing of like, oh yeah, I'm a wreck, I'm a mess, and here I'm doing. And of course, I'm not a wreck, I'm not a mess, but there's, on my journey at least, I think this is a very big quality to the 6th house journey and the learning curve, is realizing that we're often interfacing and healing and correcting an internal psychology of being lost to the cause. And to bring healing to that, oftentimes we just allow ourselves to be what we are. We find a certain level of self-acceptance in that. And then people benefit and we benefit from that. The opposite of that is being in denial. One of the karmic tendencies with the 6th house is denial, which is it's a total lack of humility, and it's a lack of self-reflection or self-awareness, often necessitating karmically later on in life the need to become very self-aware. The denial psychology is negligence, not really addressing the things that are here to be addressed, and thus taking it for granted. Mistakes are made, crises are made, sickness happens, disease happens, hurt happens in relationship, accidents happen. The effects of denial creates a dysfunction in our life. And when we become aware of that denial, it brings more humility, and oftentimes a really deep sense of smallness relative to how much work we have to do. And that's why we have things like, the 12 steps and whatnot, where we're acknowledging I've made a mistake. I have to be accountable for myself and work on myself. Things like that are very Virgoian. So let's take a look. Wanda asked, can you give general advice for a 6th house square to the nodes? Absolutely. Do you want to specifically give me the nodal configuration? Feel free to give me as much details to that as you want, and I can work with it. If not, just let me know that you don't want to. While you're doing that, I'll read Jennifer's question. It is interesting for me to have Neptune in the sixth house with Scorpio. Beautiful contradictions, but obviously added to the practice aspect and compassion versus perfection. Absolutely. Thank you, Ari. This is so illuminating and resonate for these times. Oh, that reminds me. Michelle brought this up to me. Sixth house being about health and wellness. Of course, in the world right now, there's a great focus and emphasis here right now on that. I've asked Michelle when she comes home to make sure, when Dylan comes home, to make sure you wash your hands and all that kind of stuff. And it's important for me to be following the guidelines and to be supporting a general state of wellness so that the curve of COVID-19 slows and all that kind of stuff. And the awareness of grooming and taking care of our physical health is a part of it. But it can become so neurotic that we actually don't allow ourselves to build immunity. Now, the immune system is the 12th house. I'm not talking about COVID-19. This is just sort of a gateway for me to think about this. The immune system is the 12th house. We have a Virgo 6th house psychology of, maybe someone needs to sterilize everything all the time. So it's like hospital grade, like all the time. And, we all know people like that, or maybe we are people like that, where there's like a fear of germs or a fear of anything that, isn't perfectly sterile. And maybe we have a compromised immune system and we need to do that. So there's no judgment for this, but the psychology of neurosis relative to that, what's happening is it is keeping us identified with the state of control and protection, and thus doesn't actually allow us psychologically and physically to adopt and acclimate to the reality around us. In the 12th house, we have the immune system and the ability to be in an environment with bacteria and agents, things like that, and to develop immunity to it means we're, in a sense, building the antibodies for it. We're building a certain resilience for it so it can exist, but it's not affecting us. And that's like a Neptunian Pisces 12th house psychology. People can be projecting all kinds of things on us, but if we're vibrating in a state of love, we don't have to protect ourselves from it because we're clear in our vibration, we're healthy, we're well. But there can be in the sixth house this process with wanting to be controlling, and those who are working with certain sicknesses and diseases, that might be a part of their path to bring great attentiveness to. I have a dear friend actually who has the south node in the sixth house, and she's sensitive to any chemicals, perfumes, laundry detergent. Her body will go into a really negative reaction. And while that's not the end goal of her journey, there's a process here. There's more beyond that. She needs to, and she's learned the importance of being very meticulous, sixth house, about the environment and the smells and the things around her. So it's an area of importance to be attuned to, and also where we might be needing to give attention to these things versus where we might be affirming and asserting too much control and neurosis. So, okay. North Node in Taurus. Okay. North Node in Taurus. So we have, okay, everyone imagine this. Venus is in Aquarius in the sixth house. The South Node is in Scorpio in the third. The North Node is in Taurus in the ninth. So let me address this. First, generally, sixth house planets squaring the nodes. It's possible to have a square between a sixth house planet that isn't necessarily with the ninth and the third. But to keep this example general and solid, I'm going to keep it with the ninth and the third. But first, any planet in the sixth house or in the nodes means there is a sixth house issue that is unresolved that has led to the soul flipping in its construct of self, attempting to achieve a sense of wholeness and wellness, with this core issue perpetuating a continual crisis and thus confusion. This can manifest itself as a psychology of inferiority, wherein one is not able to access and claim and move forward with their evolutionary trajectory because of an underlying fixation within consciousness of there being something wrong. And that can equal sixth house karmic issues of there being unresolved work that needs to be completed, or there needs to be, in another way of framing that, a return to the healing path or the sacred work that the soul is here to do that they have been avoiding because of a sense of I don't want to do it wrong, or I'm not ready enough, etc. When we archetypally bring the sixth house to the third house, ninth house nodes, it very much deals with the issue of spiritual cosmologies, philosophies, and belief systems that dictate a construct, a perception of impurity and wrongness. Think about Sagittarius being a belief system. And then sixth house is how we're working on ourselves. So we have so many religions and religious constructs that teach us about sin, that teach us about there's something wrong. It really points to our underlying philosophy and understanding of who we are and our place in this life. Relative to the third house, it speaks a lot about the issue of control because there are zillions of details to address. And the nervous system, the mind, the hands can't do all of them. You only have two hands. And so it leads to, relative to a sense of needing to control, or the psychology of denial, the third house will create a sense of disorder and overwhelm where there are too many things to work with or deal with. So these are some of the issues. I've seen that third house, sixth house axis very common with a sixth house square to the nodes in people who have had very strong religious conditioning. In the case of Venus and Aquarius in the sixth house, the soul is working on its own self-value by way of liberating from conditioned projections and ideas of self and value and esteem and worth that resonate with imperfection, inferiority, or superiority, and returning to establish and claim a self-worth and self-esteem that allows the soul to give Venus, to share in the service, sixth house, that will support one, that will be an expression of her own liberated being. So it's like doing the work that the higher self wants to do. And in that sense, helping other people to liberate from their own traumas linked to the psychology of inferiority and superiority. The square to the nodes here, the resolution node being the Scorpio node in the third house, which then very much speaks to the articulation, the communication of words that cut to the bottom line. So this might be about being a healer and using hands, third house hands, working with astrology, helping people with healing. And I think the Venus sixth house Aquarius emphasizes so much around self-value and self-worth. It's also going to speak to, in terms of their relationship to their physical reality, their own health, how they wash the dishes. Is there a feeling of embodiment there? Venus. Is there pleasure? Is there a sense of embodiment and ease in the physical reality? Aquarius wants us to liberate from anything that's stupid. You know, a bunch of chores and practices or busy work or paperwork or whatever work that is deriving from the lower mind and conditioned thinking. The key here is to think more intelligently and improve upon the conditions of physical reality in a way that expresses a more intelligent and more evolved holistic understanding of how things work together. So it's really innovating and improving the embodiment of one's life. And I think as a healer, as a person who's helping other people, there's this ever unfolding movement to self-improve, to self-correct, to develop more attunement, more care, more connection to how I can be making everything work better, be more essential, be less bound by unnecessary conditions so that it's pure and clear and efficient. But Venus, pleasurable. And what's Venus here? What's pleasure here? Nothing's extra. It's not bound by a lot of other stuff. And in this case, with the Taurus in the ninth house, belief systems that dictate who you're supposed to be, right? What is the spiritually pure way to go about this? So it would be simplifying one's beliefs and really getting to the bottom line, really getting to the core of what works and finding greater pleasure in that. Okay. Carolyn, sixth house cusp, sixth house Virgo on cusp, Neptune conjunct Libra sun. I've lived a oblivious kind of denial. Yep, that can definitely be denial. You know, Jennifer also mentioned Neptune in the sixth house. I just want to speak to that for a moment. Neptune in the sixth house is a beautiful example of the apparent paradox and confusing, irreconcilable reality between spirit and flesh. But what's the whole teaching there? That they're not irreconcilable. And so, you know, Neptune says God is not limited. God doesn't have limitations. Love doesn't have limitations. And the sixth house says, work on that. Work on your healing. Work on your devotion to God. Work on bringing out the unity of spirit and flesh in the work that you do. That's why it's so common with Neptune in the sixth house to read that traditional idea of like mystery diseases, mystery illnesses. And what that's really about is this idea that it's not about the control of being able to diagnose and perfect everything. It really takes us back to the work in front of us. And Neptune is devotion, Neptune is surrender, Neptune is love, Neptune is prayer. And it wants us to bring that into our life. It doesn't want us to control it with something that we can know and measure and say, I can make this work how I think it's supposed to work. And there is work to do. But the second we start to try to make it perfect, like I'm going to get rid of this and do a big cleanse and get rid of all the toxins out of my body, it's like it's playing God. And that's one of the lessons of Neptune in the sixth. I'll take one more question from Ria and then I'll end this. Can you speak to the significance of Mercury as a sixth house ruler when it is placed within the sixth house? Okay, I have Mercury in Gemini, conjunct Chiron in the sixth. That's great. Oh, weird. My computer just switched to tablet mode. I have no clue how that keeps on happening. Hopefully nothing changed on your end. Okay, so everyone pull out your imagination. Sixth house, Gemini, with Mercury there in Chiron. Gemini in the sixth house is mental health. It's refining and working and improving upon your use of the mind, which means attention to detail, how your mind is intellectually organizing thought and information and then being able to articulate it and use it in a way that is useful and helpful. For example, if you are studying information or medical knowledge, the Gemini in the sixth house is about self-accuracy and attentiveness to the detail, not brushing over information, but really spending time with each part of the anatomy and learning how it all connects, and it's step by step. The challenge is that Gemini really doesn't operate in a holistic sense from the get-go. It operates by adding more context to our existing mental constructs. And so we have a world construct in our mind, how everything's logically placed together. And then we communicate, we gather more information, we pick up information with our senses, and we internalize it with our mind. And then that adds context, and our logical context for life becomes more comprehensive and more holistic. And so the key would be to not become pressured or stressed out in trying to perfect and control and achieve some kind of mental perfection and synthesis where it all ties together and makes sense, because that can't happen. It's really about taking it step by step and learning what's being learned, and most importantly, practicing and giving and serving and using the knowledge and the information. Also, Gemini is hands and articulation. So I don't know what kind of work you do. You're welcome to write this as I'm speaking. But that, actually the way you work with your hands, it could even be energy work or massage or anything that is of hands related, or writing or communicating or studying information that is of a healing nature. So whatever it is that you're giving and serving, the key is to do what you can and to allow for further learning and further growth and further refinement and further attentiveness and care to the details where there is room for improvement to simply happen along the way as you go, as you learn. And with Chiron there, of course, relating to the archetype of the sacred medicine that is made available by way of connecting with a core sense of vulnerability and brokenness inside. So here it would be, there might be an inner, and I don't know your chart, and so I can't really speak to what this is for you, but in very general sense, Chiron in the 6th house in Gemini can be an inner perception of I don't know enough, or I don't have enough information, or I'm not good enough at articulating and bringing to synthesis my skills or my knowledge. I need to know more, a sense of insufficiency and lack relative to one's knowledge. And it can also be a physical impairment, like cognitively operating differently than others, or physically your hands, your extremities operate differently than others, or you're ambidextrous, or there's something in terms of your coordination, Gemini, that really requires you to honor and trust yourself and your way, and thus open your heart to that feeling of brokenness and difference, and actually realize that by opening to that with compassion, it makes you available and brings more compassion into yourself to give and to serve, because you're not allowing yourself to hold back based on identifying with a sense of being broken. So in Chiron in the 6th house in general, with Gemini there and Mercury, very much, it's very reflective of that catechist. If you saw that, the Alex Gray picture of the wounded healer, it's a 3-part painting series where this guy is like a wreck and he's being dismembered and he's like stressed out. It's like really hard. It's intense. And then in the final painting, you have this person walking up a hill with a catechist, that snake-like thing. And it's very much like that's, very Mercury-like. This healer, this medicine person. So that's some context for that signature. All right, everyone. I really enjoyed this. So thank you for joining me. And I think this will go on YouTube eventually. Much love to all of us. Till next time. Oh, my mouse doesn't work now. I have to touch my screen. Bye.